My husband Richard packed his bags on our golden anniversary and told me he was leaving for his high school sweetheart Elaine, whom he'd secretly reconnected with at our class reunion. I didn't scream. I didn't beg him to stay. I simply nodded, called my lawyer, and by sunset had transferred our shared assets to accounts he couldn't access, and changed the locks on our Victorian mansion, the same mansion his wealthy aunt had promised him in her will for decades. As for his inheritance, the moment his aunt discovered his betrayal through my carefully worded letter, she rewrote her will, leaving her entire fortune to me instead. Richard's perfectly planned future crumbled overnight, while mine was just beginning to unfold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined our 50th wedding anniversary would end this way. After 5 decades together, I had envisioned a day of celebration in our meticulously restored Victorian home in Oak Ridge Heights, a property that had been in Richard's family for generations. The June morning dawned bright and clear as I arranged golden roses in crystal vases throughout our home. I had risen early to prepare Richard's favorite breakfast: blueberry pancakes with fresh berries from our garden, crisp bacon, and freshly squeezed orange juice. The table in our sunroom was set with the vintage lace tablecloth that had graced every important family celebration for 50 years. A bottle of Dom Perignon stood chilling in an ice bucket, a special indulgence Richard had brought home the evening before with an enigmatic smile. The air was filled with the gentle scent of roses and honeysuckle from the gardens I had tended with my own hands over the years. This garden had been my sanctuary, my therapy during the inevitable ups and downs of a 50-year marriage. I remember when we first moved into this house after Richard's parents passed away. Our children, James, Elizabeth, and Daniel, were just starting their careers then. Everyone commented on how fortunate we were to have such a magnificent family home. "You're so lucky, Margaret," my sister Caroline had said with that wistful look she'd perfected over the years. Lucky. As if 5 decades of supporting Richard's career, raising 3 children, managing our household, and eventually caring for his aging parents had been luck rather than dedicated work. Richard had climbed from junior associate at Harrington and Webb Financial Advisors to senior partner, building a reputation as a shrewd investment counselor to some of the wealthiest families in our state. His career had demanded sacrifices from all of us: relocations during the children's formative years, countless evenings alone while he wined and dined clients, social gatherings where I played the perfect corporate wife. I had set aside my own aspirations of opening an art gallery to create the stable, impeccable home life that facilitated his success. At 65, I found myself reflecting on the journey we had taken together. Richard's retirement 2 years ago had been an adjustment after decades of a marriage defined by his career and my supporting role. I had imagined this new chapter would allow us to finally travel, to explore interests together, to rediscover each other. Instead, Richard had joined 3 country club boards, taken up golf with almost religious devotion, and seemed perpetually busy with a men's investment club. Meanwhile, I had quietly begun taking art classes at the local college, rekindling the passion for painting I had set aside decades ago. The sunroom at the back of the house had gradually transformed into my studio, light flooding through the windows onto canvases that increasingly reflected my emerging voice. I glanced at the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. 9:30 in the morning. Richard had gone out for his regular Saturday golf game but had promised to return by noon. "It's our special day, Maggie," he had assured me with a kiss before leaving. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. I have something important to discuss with you, too." The sound of Richard's car in the driveway pulled me from my reflections. I moved to the window and watched as he emerged from his luxury sedan, but something in his movements gave me pause. Rather than heading directly to the house, he remained by the car, phone pressed to his ear. His golf clothes had been replaced by a suit I didn't recognize, more modern and fitted than his usual conservative style. His silver hair looked different, slightly darker at the temples, styled with more attention than his usual pragmatic cut. "Maggie?" Richard's voice echoed, through the foyer, followed by the sound of his footsteps on the marble floor. "In the kitchen," I called, keeping my tone light. "Just putting the finishing touches on our anniversary brunch." He appeared in the doorway, and I was struck by how different he looked. Beyond the new suit and hair, there was something in his posture, his expression, a barely contained energy that seemed at odds with the Richard I had known for 5 decades. "Listen, Maggie, before we sit down, I need to talk to you about something." "Of course," I said, removing my apron and smoothing my golden silk dress. "Shall we go to the sunroom? I've set everything up for our anniversary brunch." "No," he said quickly. "Let's sit in the study. What I need to discuss is private." Private. An odd choice of word after 50 years of marriage, but I followed him to his wood-paneled study, dominated by the antique desk that had belonged to his grandfather. "Maggie," he began, then stopped. "Margaret, we've been married for 50 years. Today." "Yes?" I smiled, though something in his formal tone sent a chill through me. "Our golden anniversary. I've been planning the celebration for months." He nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket and removed an envelope. 50 years is a long time, a lifetime, really." "It certainly is," I agreed, my eyes drawn to the envelope. "But here we are. We made it." "Yes, we did." He paused. "And in those 50 years, you've been everything a man could ask for in a wife. Supportive, dedicated, an excellent mother to our children." His words sounded rehearsed, as if he were delivering a performance review rather than an anniversary tribute. "But Maggie," he continued, "life is short. Too short to settle for merely adequate." "Adequate?" I repeated, the word hanging between us like an accusation. "Do you remember Elaine Winters?" he asked suddenly. "From high school? Your girlfriend? Before we met in college?" "Yes." I nodded carefully. "You mentioned seeing her at the reunion last month." The reunion I had opted to skip, encouraging Richard to go alone while I attended Elizabeth's medical conference presentation in Chicago. "Elaine and I have reconnected, Margaret," he said, an unexpected intensity in his voice. "Not just as old friends. We've been seeing each other since the reunion." "Seeing each other?" I repeated. "You mean you've been having an affair?" "I wouldn't characterize it that way," he said, straightening his tie. "It's deeper than that. It's a reconnection with the person I was always meant to be with." "And what does this reconnection mean for our marriage?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I'm leaving, Margaret," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Today. Elaine is waiting for me. We're going to travel, explore, live the life we might have had." "On our anniversary," I clarified, my voice distant to my own ears. "You've chosen our golden anniversary to tell me you're abandoning our marriage for your high school girlfriend." He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "The timing is unfortunate, I admit, but Maggie, we're both 65. We could have another 20 years ahead of us. Don't we deserve to spend those years truly happy?" "And what about the house?" "Your aunt's inheritance?" I asked, forcing myself to focus on practical matters. A shadow crossed his face at the mention of Aunt Beatrice. "The house is jointly owned, of course. We'll need to discuss whether to sell it or if you want to buy out my share. As for Aunt Bee's estate, nothing changes there. I'm still her sole heir." Aunt Beatrice, Richard's father's sister, had never married, dedicating her life to building an impressive investment portfolio and art collection. At 93, she still lived independently in her penthouse apartment, sharp as ever and famously particular about how her fortune would be distributed. "I see," I said, rising slowly. "Is there anything else I should know about your plans?" Richard reached for the envelope again. "It's all outlined here. My proposed division of our assets, my thoughts on the house, support payments, My attorney believes it's very generous. I'll have my own attorney review it tomorrow, I replied, making no move to take the document. You don't have an attorney, Richard pointed out with a hint of his usual paternalism. I will by tomorrow, I assured him. Now, if you'll excuse… Me? I need some time to process this. Anniversary surprise. As I closed the study door behind me, I was surprised by the steadiness of my hands, the clarity of my thoughts. The anniversary brunch lay forgotten in the sunroom, golden decorations now a mockery of the vows they were meant to celebrate. I made my way to the kitchen, picked up the phone, and dialed a number I had programmed years ago but never expected to use. Harper Morris & Associates Family Law, a professional voice answered. This is Margaret Harrington, I said quietly, listening to the sounds of my husband packing upstairs. I need to make an appointment with Caroline Morris as soon as possible. It's regarding a divorce. As I arranged the meeting for Monday morning, I gazed out at my garden and felt a curious sense of possibility blooming alongside the shock and betrayal. For 50 years, I had been Richard Harrington's wife. Now, I would be simply Margaret. I had no idea yet who that woman might be, but as I heard Richard's footsteps on the stairs, suitcases in hand, I realized I was about to find out. That night, I barely slept. The master bedroom, our bedroom for 3 decades, felt cavernous without Richard's familiar presence. The silence was both deafening and liberating. No gentle snoring, no rustling of pages as he read financial journals before sleep, no murmured conversations about household matters or family concerns. Just the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel and the occasional call of an owl in the garden. By dawn, I had watched the stars fade and the first golden rays break across the horizon, a sunrise I had seen countless times but now observed with new eyes. The world looked different somehow, sharper and more vivid, as though a veil had been lifted. Or perhaps it was simply that I was seeing it as Margaret rather than as Richard's wife, a distinction I hadn't realized existed until yesterday. Showered and dressed with particular care in a tailored navy suit I typically reserved for board meetings at the art museum. If this was to be the first day of my new life, I would face it with every bit of the dignity and strength I had cultivated over 65 years. At precisely 7:30 a.m., I picked up my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to Caroline Morris, confirming our appointment at 9. Her assistant had apparently been instructed to put me through immediately. Margaret, Caroline greeted me, her voice crisp and professional. I've cleared my morning for you. Given the unusual timing of your husband's departure, I suggest we move quickly to secure your financial interests. That's exactly what I was thinking, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I'd like to discuss freezing our joint accounts, as well. Already done, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her tone. I filed an emergency petition with the court last night after our brief conversation. Richard won't be able to access those funds until a judge reviews the situation, which could take weeks. I felt a rush of gratitude for this woman I barely knew, a divorce attorney whose number I had programmed into my phone years ago after watching a friend's husband empty their accounts during a bitter separation. Thank you, Caroline. I'll see you at 9. The second call was to my oldest friend, Diana Reynolds, who had stood beside me at my wedding 50 years earlier and who had navigated her own divorce a decade ago. Maggie? It's not even 8 o'clock. Is everything okay? Her voice was still rough with sleep. Richard left me yesterday, I said simply. For his high school girlfriend, on our anniversary. There was a brief silence, then a string of colorful expletives that made me smile despite everything. That absolute bastard, she finally concluded. I'm coming over. Give me 30 minutes. I have a lawyer's appointment at 9, I told her. But afterward, yes, I could use a friend. I'll meet you at your house at 11, she said firmly, with champagne. Not to celebrate, though honestly, good riddance, but because sometimes a situation just demands alcohol before noon. The third call was the most difficult. I dialed James, my eldest son, knowing he would be awake and preparing for his morning run regardless of it being Sunday. "Mom?" His voice registered surprise. "Everything okay?" "It's early." "Not exactly," I said, forcing myself to remain composed. "Your father and I have separated. He's moved out." There was a stunned silence. "What? When? What happened?" "Yesterday. Our anniversary." I kept my explanation brief and factual, sparing him the most painful details. "He's been seeing someone else, his high school girlfriend, Elaine. They reconnected at the reunion last month. He's moved into her condo in Riverside Heights. This has to be some kind of midlife crisis," James said, and I could hear him shifting into problem-solving mode, the same approach he took with financial markets. "Though at his age, I guess it's more of a late-life crisis. Have you talked to a counselor? Maybe once the initial shock wears off." "James," I interrupted gently, "this isn't a temporary situation. Your father has made his decision. I've made mine. I've retained a divorce attorney and will be meeting with her this morning." "Divorce?" he repeated, the word seeming to echo through the phone. "After 50 years? Mom, it's insane. Let me talk to Dad. There must be some way to—" "Please don't," I said firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but this is between your father and me. What I need from you now is your support, not intervention. And I need you to tell Elizabeth and Daniel. I don't have the energy to explain this 3 times today." He was quiet for a moment. "Of course," he finally said. "Whatever you need. But, Mom, are you okay? Do you want me to come down this weekend?" I'm not sure what I am yet," I admitted, "but I will be. And yes, I'd like to see you, but give me a week or 2 to get my bearings. I'll let you know." After we hung up, I made my way downstairs to the kitchen, half expecting to find Richard reading the Sunday paper at the breakfast table as he had for decades. The empty room was another small shock, a preview of what my life would look like going forward. I made a single cup of coffee and took it out to the garden, sitting on the stone bench beneath the wisteria arch. The morning was clear and mild, the garden in full June bloom, and I found myself noticing details I had overlooked for years: the way the morning light filtered through the Japanese maple leaves, the complex fragrance of the heirloom roses, the industrious movement of bees among the lavender. For the first time in 50 years, I had no one to consider but myself. No husband's preferences to accommodate, no family schedule to coordinate, no social obligations tied to Richard's career or position. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. By the time I arrived at Caroline Morris's office in the sleek downtown high-rise, I had formulated a clear set of priorities. Caroline greeted me with a firm handshake and directed me to a comfortable chair in her elegantly appointed office. "Before we begin," she said, sliding a notepad across the polished table between us, "I'd like you to write down the names and contact information for your husband's most important clients. We'll need leverage." I pushed the notepad back untouched. "I understand your strategy, but that's not the approach I want to take. Richard betrayed me personally, but I won't sabotage the career he built, even now." Caroline leaned back, assessing me with newfound interest. "Interesting. Most of my clients want blood." "I don't want blood," I clarified. "I want fairness. I want respect. And I want to emerge from this divorce with my dignity intact." A slight smile touched her lips. "Dignity is often underrated in these situations, but I respect your position. Tell me then, what do you want from this divorce?" I laid out my priorities systematically: financial independence, retention of the Victorian mansion if possible, protection of the children's eventual inheritance, and a clean break that would allow me to move forward without prolonged legal battles. "The house might be challenging," Caroline noted, making notations in her leather portfolio. It's a significant asset, and unless you can buy out his share— I believe I can, I interrupted. I inherited a modest but significant portfolio from my parents 10 years ago. It's in my name only, and I've managed it carefully. Its value should be sufficient for at least a partial buyout, with structured payments for the remainder. Caroline looked up, clearly reassessing her initial impression of me. You've maintained separate investments throughout your marriage? My father was a cautious man, I explained. He insisted that I keep some assets in my name alone, just in case. Richard never objected. I suppose he didn't think it consequential compared to his own portfolio. Your father was a wise man, Caroline observed. He lived through the Depression, I said simply. He understood that security could vanish overnight. For the next hour, we discussed strategies, documentation I would need to gather, and immediate steps to protect myself financially. By the time we finished, I had a comprehensive list of tasks and a clearer sense of what the coming months would entail. One more thing before you go, Caroline said, closing her portfolio. What about Aunt Beatrice's inheritance? Richard mentioned it during your conversation. Yes, I confirmed. His aunt is 93 and in excellent health. She's quite wealthy, real estate, investments, art, and has always made it clear that Richard is her sole heir. It's been a significant factor in his financial planning for decades. Caroline tapped her pen thoughtfully. Does she know about the separation? Not yet. Interesting. She met my eyes directly. I'm not suggesting anything unethical, but information matters in these situations, particularly to elderly relatives with strong moral convictions. I understood her implication immediately. Aunt Beatrice has always been fond of me, I acknowledged, and she holds very traditional views about marriage and family. Just something to consider, Caroline said, rising to end our meeting. Sometimes, the most powerful strategy isn't what you do, but what you allow others to discover for themselves. When I arrived home, Diana was already waiting in my driveway, a tote bag in one hand and a determined expression on her face. She had been my closest friend since college, the maid of honor at my wedding, godmother to Elizabeth, a constant through 5 decades of life's joys and challenges. At 66, Diana remained striking. Silver hair cut in a stylish bob, still. Slender from her daily tennis games, dressed in the bold colors and artistic jewelry that reflected her career as a gallery owner. Unlike me, she had never allowed marriage to subsume her professional ambitions, and I had often envied her clear sense of self independent from her roles as wife and mother. You look better than expected, she observed, embracing me tightly. I thought I'd find you either catatonic or homicidal. Neither, surprisingly, I replied, leading her through the house to the terrace, where I had set out glasses and a light lunch. I feel strange, like I'm watching someone else's life unfold. Diana unpacked her tote bag, revealing not just the promised champagne, but also a folder of documents. Shock, she diagnosed confidently. It'll wear off, and then you'll either fall apart or get furious. Either is fine, by the way, but in the meantime— She pushed the folder toward me. These might be useful. Financial worksheets, divorce checklists, contact information for the team that helped me when Frank left. And this— She extracted a business card— is for the therapist who kept me from either jumping off a bridge or pushing Frank off one. I accepted the card, unexpectedly touched by her practicality. Thank you. Though I'm not sure I need— Everyone needs therapy during divorce, she interrupted firmly. Especially after 50 years. It's not a sign of weakness. It's basic maintenance, like changing the oil in your car. Now, she expertly opened the champagne, the cork making a satisfying pop. Let's drink to Richard's breathtaking stupidity and your unexpected liberation. As she filled 2 flutes with bubbling champagne, I felt the first genuine laugh in days rise within me. To stupidity and liberation, I echoed, raising my glass. though I'm not sure which is which yet. We spent the afternoon on the terrace, moving from champagne to iced tea as Diana listened to the full story of Richard's departure. Unlike my son, she offered no platitudes, no suggestions for reconciliation, no minimizing of the betrayal. Instead, she validated my feelings, shared wisdom from her own experience, and gradually helped me shape a vision of what my life might become beyond the initial crisis. "The first year is brutal," she warned candidly. "Everything will remind you of him. Holidays, anniversaries, inside jokes, favorite restaurants. But gradually, you'll create new memories, new traditions. And eventually, I promise you this, you'll wonder how you tolerated him for so long." 50 years is a long investment to write off, I mused, watching shadows lengthen across the garden. "Sunk cost fallacy," Diana countered, her business acumen showing. "Just because you invested 50 years doesn't mean you should invest 50 more. The only relevant question is, going forward, what life do you want to create?" It was a question I had never truly asked myself. Not at 18 when I met Richard, not at 20 when we married, not at any point in the 5 decades that followed. My life had been shaped by responding to others' needs and expectations. Richard's career, the children's development, the social obligations of a corporate wife, the proper management of a family home. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "I honestly don't know who I am without him." Diana reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then this, my dear friend, despite all its pain, might be the most extraordinary opportunity of your life. At 65, you get to discover Margaret." As the evening approached, Diana helped me map out a plan for the coming week. Appointments to open new bank accounts, meetings with our financial advisor to discuss portfolio adjustments, practical steps to secure my independence. As we worked, a determination began to replace the shock that had carried me through the initial crisis. By the time she left, promising to check in daily, I felt a curious sense of purpose emerging from the chaos of the previous 24 hours. This was not the life I had planned, not the future I had envisioned while arranging golden roses for an anniversary celebration. But perhaps, just perhaps, it might become something unexpected and valuable in its own right. As night fell, I moved through the house, turning off lights in rooms I had shared with Richard for decades, finally ending in his study, the space that had been exclusively his domain throughout our marriage. The leather-bound books on financial, management, the collections of antique coins, the photographs of Richard with various business associates and politicians, all reflected his identity, his ambitions, his world. On impulse, I sat in his chair behind the imposing desk, running, my fingers over the polished wood surface, opening drawers that had always been tacitly off-limits to me. In the center drawer, a small key caught my attention, one I recognized as belonging to Richard's personal safe, hidden behind the portrait of his grandfather on the wall. Without consciously deciding to do so, I rose, removed the portrait, and used the key to open the small wall safe. Inside, I found what I expected: important documents, his passport, an antique watch passed down through generations of Harrington men, but also a small velvet box I didn't recognize. Opening it, I discovered a diamond pendant far more extravagant than anything Richard had ever given me, along with a card inscribed simply, "For Elaine, the love I never forgot." The physical evidence of his betrayal, planned, purchased, hidden in our home, broke through the protective shock that had insulated me since his departure. A sob rose in my throat, followed by another, until I found myself sitting on the floor of his study, the velvet box in my lap, finally allowing myself to feel the full magnitude of what had been lost. I cried for the young woman who had believed in forever, for the mother who had prioritized her family's happiness above her own ambitions, for the wife who had measured her success by her husband's satisfaction. I cried for 5 decades of shared history now tainted by betrayal, for the future I had assumed was secure, for the identity I had subsumed within the role of Mrs. Richard Harrington. And then, gradually, the tears subsided, replaced by a clarity that felt almost like calm. I returned the pendant to the safe but placed the card in my pocket. Rising from the floor, I straightened my clothing, wiped my face, and moved with deliberate steps to the desk phone. Without allowing myself to reconsider, I dialed a number I knew by heart, though I seldom called it directly. Beatrice Harrington, answered a crisp voice, showing no hint of the speaker's 93 years. Aunt B, I said, my own voice rough from crying. It's Margaret. I'm sorry to call so late, but something has happened that you should know about. There was a pause, then a rustle as if she were sitting up straighter. What has my nephew done? She asked, her perception as sharp as ever. He's left me, I said simply. Yesterday, our anniversary. For whom? She demanded immediately. Cutting to the heart of the matter. His high school girlfriend, Elaine Winters. I hesitated, then added the detail that I knew would matter most to this proper traditional woman. They've been seeing each other since the reunion last month. The silence that followed was charged with what I recognized as Beatrice's formidable anger, controlled but potent. I see, she said finally. And where is Richard now? At her condominium in Riverside Heights. They're planning to travel, to start fresh. The words still felt surreal as I spoke them. After 50 years, she stated, rather than asked, the disapproval evident in her tone. On your golden anniversary. Yes. Another silence. This one calculated. Come to brunch tomorrow, she declared. 11 o'clock. There are matters we should discuss, you and I. I'll be there, I promised, recognizing the significance of the invitation. In 30 years, I had never been invited to Beatrice's penthouse without Richard. Margaret, she said before hanging up, wear something appropriate for the lawyers who will be joining us. As I replaced the receiver, I felt an unexpected smile forming, the first genuine one since Richard's revelation. Caroline Morris had been right. Information did matter, particularly to elderly relatives with strong moral convictions and considerable fortunes at their disposal. I ascended the stairs to what had been our bedroom, removed Richard's card to Elaine from my pocket and placed it carefully in the drawer of my bedside table. It wasn't evidence I intended to use in divorce proceedings. I had meant what I said to Caroline about maintaining my dignity. But it was a reminder, should my resolve weaken in the difficult days ahead. For Elaine, the love I never forgot. And for Margaret, I thought, as I prepared for my second sleepless night, a future she never expected but might, with courage and determination, come to embrace. The next morning dawned with surprising clarity. I had expected to feel exhausted after another mostly sleepless night, but instead found myself alert and focused as I prepared for my meeting with Beatrice. The invitation, or summons, more accurately, had been unexpected but not entirely surprising. Beatrice Harrington had always valued loyalty above all else, a principle she had instilled in her family across generations. In the complex calculus of her moral code, betrayal ranked as the cardinal sin. Richard, of all people, should have known this. I dressed with deliberate care, selecting a conservative cream silk blouse and charcoal pencil skirt that whispered old money and quiet dignity. Around my neck, I fastened the single strand of pearls Richard had given me on our 25th anniversary, not out of sentiment, but because they represented an investment in our shared history that I refused to relinquish. My wedding and engagement rings remained in their customary places on my left hand. Those symbols, too, I had earned through 5 decades of commitment. As I applied a final touch of lipstick, my phone rang. James calling earlier than expected. Mom, he began without preamble, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. I just spoke with Dad. I see, I said neutrally, slipping on the pearl earrings that completed my ensemble. And? He tried. To explain. To justify. James broke off, clearly struggling to maintain his professional composure. It's unbelievable. He actually seems to think we'll understand, even support his decision. Like abandoning his wife of 50 years for his high school girlfriend is some romantic gesture rather than a pathetic cliché. What did you tell him? I asked, genuinely curious about how my serious, analytical son had responded to his father's rationalization. I told him I was disappointed. The understatement in James's tone made it clear just how furious he truly was. I told him his choices reflected poorly on the values he claimed to have instilled in us, and I told him not to expect me to play mediator. Elizabeth and Daniel feel the same way. You've spoken to them? I hadn't expected him to move so quickly. Conference call last night after we talked. Daniel wants to drive down immediately. Elizabeth is trying to rearrange her surgical schedule. I reminded them that you asked for space, but they're concerned. I felt a rush of gratitude for these adults who had once been the children I had raised, for their loyalty, their protective instincts, their righteous indignation on my behalf. Tell them I'm managing, but I appreciate their concern. Maybe in a week or two. Mom, James interrupted gently. You don't have to handle this alone. We're not children anymore who need to be protected from difficult truths. We're adults who can support our mother through what Dad has put her through. For a moment, I couldn't speak, touched by both his insight and his compassion. Thank you, I managed finally. That means more than you know. But right now, I need to focus on practical matters. I'm meeting with Beatrice this morning. Aunt Bea? The surprise in his voice was evident. Does she know? She does now, I confirmed. I called her last night. A low whistle came through. The phone. Dad won't like that. Your father's preferences are no longer my primary concern, I replied, a new steadiness in my voice that seemed to surprise us both. Good for you, Mom, James said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Keep me posted? I will. I hesitated, then added, I love you, James. Your siblings, too. We love you back, he replied simply. And Mom? Whatever happens with Aunt Bea today, remember that you have your own strength to rely on. You always have, even if Dad didn't recognize it. His words stayed with me as I drove through the Sunday morning quiet to Beatrice's building in the most exclusive part of the city. The doorman, who had known me for decades as Richard's wife, greeted me with a deference that felt subtly different, more direct, less derivative. Mrs. Harrington, he said, escorting me personally to the private elevator that served only the penthouse. Ms. Beatrice said to send you right up. The elevator rose smoothly to the top floor, where Beatrice's housekeeper, Elena, was waiting to usher me into the formal dining room. The table was impeccably set for brunch, but instead of the intimate gathering I had expected, I found myself facing not only Beatrice, but two distinguished-looking men in suits unusual for a Sunday morning. Beatrice rose as I entered, her 93 years evident only in the fine translucence of her skin, and a slight stoop to her otherwise rigid posture. Her silver hair was arranged in an elegant French twist, her attire formal despite the hour. The clear blue eyes that had intimidated generations of Harringtons showed no sign of diminishment with age. Margaret, she greeted me, extending both hands in a gesture of unusual warmth. Right on time, as always, one of your many virtues. I accepted her hands and the kiss on both cheeks that followed, another departure from her typically reserved manner. Thank you for inviting me, Beatrice. Nonsense. She dismissed my gratitude with a wave. Family stands together in crisis. And make no mistake, Richard's behavior constitutes a crisis of both morality and judgment. She gestured to the men who had risen at my entrance. My attorney, Howard Phillips, and my estate planner, Julian Westfield. Gentlemen, my nephews. Wife, Margaret Harrington. I noted her specific phrasing. My nephew's wife, not my niece-in-law, or some more distancing term. It was a subtle but significant indication of where her loyalties lay. Please, sit, she directed, indicating the chair to her right, Richard's traditional place at any family gathering. Another calculated gesture. I was certain. The brunch that followed was a masterpiece of understatement. While Elena served delicate crepes, fresh fruit, and perfectly prepared omelets, Beatrice guided the conversation through seemingly innocuous topics: the unseasonable weather, an upcoming exhibition at the art museum, a human interest story from the morning paper. The two attorneys contributed appropriately, revealing themselves to be cultured, educated men with interests beyond their professional specialties. Only after coffee was served did Beatrice finally turn the conversation to the matter at hand. Now, Margaret, I believe we should discuss the implications of Richard's indiscretion. Her choice of word managed to make 50 years of marriage sound like a minor detour in her nephew's life journey, rather than its central axis. I'm not sure what you mean, I replied carefully, mindful of the attorney's presence. Beatrice's eyes sharpened. Let's dispense with coyness, my dear. It doesn't suit either of us. Richard has betrayed not only his marriage vows, but the values upon which this family was built. Such actions have consequences. Howard Phillips cleared his throat. Perhaps I should explain. Ms. Harrington has asked us to review and revise her estate planning documents in light of recent developments. I see, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I did. And how does this concern me? Directly, Beatrice stated flatly. For over 30 years, I have maintained a clear succession plan for my estate. Richard, as my only nephew and closest male relative, was to inherit everything: the investment portfolio, the real estate holdings, my art collection, this penthouse. The total value, as of Friday's market close, was approximately $43 million. I couldn't suppress a small gasp at the figure, far larger than even Richard had estimated in his occasional speculations about his aunt's wealth. Was, I repeated, catching the past tense in her statement. Precisely. Beatrice nodded approvingly, as if I were a particularly quick student. Richard's behavior has disqualified him as a worthy steward of the Harrington legacy. 5 generations of this family have stood for integrity, commitment, and honor. I will not have my life's work and my ancestors' accumulated achievements pass to a man who discards 50 years of marriage on a nostalgic whim. Julian Westfield opened a leather portfolio and extracted several documents. Ms. Harrington has instructed us to draft a new will and trust instruments. The changes are significant and will be executed immediately following our meeting today. I still don't understand my role in this, I said, though a suspicion was beginning to form. Beatrice reached over and covered my hand with her own, a startling gesture from a woman who rarely initiated physical contact. My dear Margaret, you have exemplified the Harrington values far better than my own blood relative. For 50 years you have shown loyalty, dignity, and commitment to this family. Those qualities deserve recognition and reward. Howard Phillips slid a document across the table toward me. Ms. Harrington proposes to make you the primary beneficiary of her estate, with specific provisions for your children and grandchildren, and certain charitable interests you both share. The world seemed to tilt momentarily as the implication became clear. Me? I managed, staring at the document before me. But I'm not family? Beatrice interrupted sharply. After 50 years, you are more Harrington than many who bear the name by birth. This decision is not based on sentiment, Margaret. It is a recognition of character and a judgment about who can best honor the principles this fortune was built upon. Richard will contest it, I said automatically, thinking like the wife who had anticipated her husband's reactions for half a century. Let him try, Beatrice replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. Howard has ensured the documents are ironclad. My mental competence has been thoroughly documented by 3 separate psychiatric evaluations over the past year. A precaution I take annually. There are precedents for disinheritance based on moral turpitude, particularly in families with our historical standing. Julian Westfield nodded in confirmation. Additionally, we've structured the transfer of certain assets as gifts during Ms. Harrington's lifetime rather than posthumous bequests. Those transfers can begin as early as this week, placing significant resources beyond any potential challenge. I don't know what to say, I admitted, overwhelmed by both the magnitude of the inheritance and the vindication it represented. Say, nothing for now, Beatrice advised. Review the documents with your own attorney. You do have one? Caroline Morris, I confirmed. I met with her yesterday. Excellent choice, Howard approved. Formidable litigator. She'll verify that your interests are fully protected in these arrangements. For the next hour, we discussed the details of Beatrice's revised estate plan. The sophistication of the financial structures exceeded my knowledge, but the basic outlines were clear. Richard would receive a token inheritance of $100,000, while the bulk of the estate would pass to me, with provisions for our children and the charitable foundations Beatrice had supported throughout her life. Most surprisingly, several valuable assets would transfer to me immediately. A portfolio of blue-chip stocks worth approximately $3 million, ownership of a vacation property in the Adirondacks, and a significant collection of American Impressionist paintings that had always been particular favorites of mine during visits to Beatrice's homes. Consider it an advance on your inheritance and a means to secure your independence while the divorce proceeds, Beatrice explained. Richard always enjoyed the leverage of superior financial resources. It seems appropriate to level the playing field. As the meeting concluded and the attorneys gathered their documents, Beatrice asked me to remain behind for a private word. Once we were alone in her elegant living room, she studied me with a penetrating gaze that seemed to assess my worthiness for the fortune she had just promised. "You're in shock," she observed accurately. "That will pass. When it does, I want you to remember something. This inheritance is not a gift. It's a recognition of value, your value, which Richard was too blind or too selfish to appreciate. The money changes nothing about who you are, Margaret. It merely provides freedom to become more fully yourself." Her words echoed what Diana had said about this being an opportunity to discover who I was beyond my role as Richard's wife. "I'm not sure I know how to do that," I admitted. "Who to be without him defining my place in the world?" "Nonsense." Beatrice dismissed my uncertainty with characteristic bluntness. "You've always known who you are. You simply subjugated that knowledge to Richard's expectations. No more of that. The Harrington legacy deserves better stewardship, and so does the remainder of your life." As Elena helped me with my coat, Beatrice added one final instruction. "Don't tell Richard about our arrangement. Let him discover it through legal channels. The anticipation of his inheritance has influenced his decisions for decades. It's time. He experiences life without that particular safety net." "You're being quite ruthless," I observed, not critically but with a newfound appreciation for this formidable woman. "I'm being just," she corrected. "There's a difference. Richard chose momentary gratification over lifelong commitment. Such choices have natural consequences." I left Beatrice's penthouse in a daze, the implications of the morning's meeting still not fully processed. As I drove home through streets that now seemed somehow altered, as if the city itself had transformed along with my circumstances, my phone rang through the car's speaker system. "Margaret Harrington," I answered automatically. "Maggie, it's Richard." His voice filled the car, startling me so much that I nearly missed a traffic signal. "We need to talk about the house and the financial arrangements. My attorney says you've frozen our accounts. That's unnecessary and frankly vindictive." The sheer audacity of his tone, annoyed, slightly patronizing, as if I were being unreasonable about a minor domestic disagreement, cut through my lingering shock. "I'm not discussing this without Caroline present," I replied, surprised by the calm authority in my voice. "Who the hell is Caroline?" he demanded. "Caroline Morris, my attorney." I took pleasure in his momentary silence. "She'll contact, your lawyer to arrange a meeting later this week." "This is ridiculous," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "We should be able to handle this like adults, Maggie. 50 years of marriage deserves better than attorneys arguing over bank accounts." "I couldn't agree more," I replied evenly. 50 years of marriage deserved better than being discarded on our anniversary for your high school girlfriend. Yet here we are. You're angry. I understand that. But this punitive approach— "Richard," I interrupted, a lifetime of deference falling away with surprising ease. "Let me be perfectly clear. I am not punishing you. I am protecting myself. There's a difference. Caroline will contact your attorney. Until then, I have nothing more to say to you." I disconnected the call before he could respond, a small act of self-assertion that sent a surprising thrill through me. For decades, conversations with Richard had ended on his terms, when he had made his point or lost interest. This time, I had controlled the conclusion. As I pulled into the driveway of the Victorian mansion, my home, not just the Harrington family estate, I reminded myself, I noticed a silver Mercedes parked near the garden gate. Diana, keeping her promise to check on me. I found her on the terrace, a pot of tea and her ever-present notebook on the table before her. She looked up as I approached, her expression shifting from concern to curiosity as she registered my demeanor. "Something's happened," she observed. "You look different." I sat across from her and poured myself a cup of tea, taking a moment to arrange my thoughts. How to explain the seismic shift that had occurred in Beatrice's dining room? The reversal of fortune that would fundamentally alter not just my financial future, but the power dynamics of my separation from Richard? "Beatrice has disinherited Richard," I said finally, the simplest summary of a complex situation. "She's making me her heir instead." Diana's eyes widened. "The entire inheritance? The one he's been counting on for decades?" I nodded. "And more. She's transferring some assets to me immediately: stocks, property, art, enough to ensure I can keep the house and maintain complete financial independence through the divorce and beyond." For perhaps the first time in our long friendship, Diana was momentarily speechless. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "Poetic justice," she declared, raising her teacup in a toast. Or, as my grandmother would have said, "The Lord works in mysterious ways." "It doesn't feel real yet," I admitted. "Yesterday I was worrying about whether I could afford to keep the house. Today I'm suddenly wealthy, in my own right, not as Richard's wife." "How does it feel?" Diana asked, watching me carefully. I considered the question seriously, searching for the honest answer beyond the surface shock. "Validating," I said finally, "as if the universe is confirming that the values I've lived by— loyalty, commitment, integrity— actually matter, that they're recognized and rewarded, even when Richard failed to value them." "Or failed to value you," Diana added pointedly. "Yes," I acknowledged. "That too. Richard doesn't know yet?" "No. Beatrice wants him to find out through official channels. She believes it's important for him to experience the consequences of his choices directly." Diana laughed softly. "I think I like Aunt B. She sounds like my kind of ruthless. Prefers to call it justice," I said, smiling despite myself. And I'm beginning to see her point. As the afternoon sun warmed the terrace and birds called to each other in the garden I had tended for decades, I felt something unexpected unfurling within me. Not just shock or vindication or the practical relief of financial security, but a tentative sense of possibility. For the first time in my adult life, the future was entirely unscripted, undetermined by Richard's career or preferences or expectations. The inheritance would certainly ease my path forward, removing practical constraints that might have limited my choices. But the true liberation, I was beginning to realize, had less to do with Beatrice's millions than with the opportunity they represented. The chance to discover who Margaret might be when not defined as Richard's wife, the children's mother, the perfect corporate hostess, the maintainer of a family legacy not originally her own. "You're smiling," Diana observed, interrupting my thoughts. "A real smile, not that polite one you've perfected for Richard's business dinners." "Am I?" I touched my face, surprised. "I suppose I'm just realizing that for the first time in 50 years, I get to decide what happens next. Not what's expected, or appropriate or advantageous for Richard's position. Just what I want." "And what do you want, Margaret?" Diana asked softly. "When all the practical matters are settled, when the divorce is final, when the dust has cleared, what then?" It was the question I had never asked myself, the one whose answer had always seemed predetermined by my roles and responsibilities. But now, sitting in the garden that had been my sanctuary through decades of a marriage that had prioritized stability over passion, I allowed myself to consider it seriously. "I want to paint," I said finally, the admission feeling like a small revolution. "Not as a hobby or a distraction, but seriously. I want to travel, not to the financial conferences, in European capitals that Richard preferred, but to places that inspire me artistically. I want to turn the formal dining room we use twice a year into a proper studio with northern light. I want to sleep in the middle of the bed and eat breakfast at noon if I feel like it. I want to rediscover the woman I might have become if I hadn't shelved her dreams to support Richard's." Diana reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Then that's exactly what you'll do. And I'll be right beside you, cheering you on." As if to punctuate her declaration, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. I glanced down to find a message from Caroline Morris. "Just received call from Richard's attorney. Apparently all his credit cards have been canceled, and his access to the company expense accounts has been restricted pending review of personal charges from the past month. Your husband is having a very bad day." I showed the message to Diana, who let out a delighted laugh. "The universe moves quickly when it's correcting an injustice," she observed. "Or perhaps the Lord does help those who help themselves." "I had nothing to do with the credit cards," I protested. "That must be Beatrice's doing." "Either way," Diana said, raising her teacup again, "I think we can officially declare that the tables have turned. Richard left on your anniversary thinking he was moving toward freedom with his high school sweetheart, financially secure with his inheritance on the horizon. Instead, he's finding himself cut off from both his past security and his future expectations. While I added, still marveling at the unexpected turn of events, am discovering that what looked like abandonment might actually be liberation." The word hung in the air between us, at once terrifying and exhilarating in its implications. Liberation. From expectations, from the constant accommodation of another's preferences, from a life defined by my relationship to others rather than by my own desires and ambitions. Richard had left on our anniversary, believing he was moving toward a new beginning with Elaine. Instead, he had inadvertently freed me to discover a beginning of my own, one with resources, possibilities, and potential I was only beginning to glimpse. For 50 years, I had been Richard Harrington's wife, supportive, accommodating, defined by his success and status. Now, I would become simply Margaret, artist, independent woman, heir to a fortune I had earned through decades of living the values Richard had so casually discarded. It wasn't the life I had planned, but as I sat in my garden with my oldest friend, contemplating a future suddenly rich with possibility, I realized it might be the life I had always deserved. The news traveled quickly, as significant financial developments always do in certain circles. By Wednesday morning, just 3 days after Richard had left me on our anniversary, the first subtle shifts in how the world responded to both of us had begun to manifest. I noticed it first at my regular breakfast meeting with the museum's fundraising committee. The conversation paused momentarily when I entered the private dining room at the Windsor Hotel, and several committee members who had previously aligned themselves with Richard's social circle made a point of greeting me with unusual warmth. "Margaret, darling," cooed Patricia Montrose, who had never called me darling in the 15 years we'd served on committees together. "We've saved you a seat right next to Evelyn." She patted the chair beside the committee chairwoman, a position typically reserved for major donors or those with particular influence. "Thank you," I replied, carefully neutral as I took the offered seat. "How is everyone this morning?" The meeting proceeded with a subtle but unmistakable difference in how my comments were received. Ideas I'd suggested months ago, which had been politely noted and promptly forgotten, were suddenly brilliant insights worth pursuing immediately. My offer to host the fall gala planning session at my home was accepted with enthusiasm rather than the hesitation that had met similar offers in the past. Only Evelyn Hayes, the chairwoman who had known me for decades, seemed unchanged in her manner. Direct, practical, and refreshingly free of the newfound deference others were showing. "Financial gossip travels faster than light," she murmured as we reviewed budget projections side by side. "Apparently, Beatrice Harrington's estate planning decisions are the talk of certain law firms." I kept my expression carefully neutral. "Oh?" Evelyn's eyes, sharp behind designer frames, assessed me knowingly. "Richard came to Vernon's club yesterday, apparently quite agitated about temporary financial disruptions and the vindictiveness of elderly relatives. Vernon said he seemed most concerned about the American Impressionist collection. Something about promises made regarding its disposition. Vernon Hayes had been Richard's golf partner for 20 years. That he would share such information with his wife, who would then relay it to me, was a significant indicator of how quickly alliances were shifting. "The collection is particularly valuable," I acknowledged without elaborating. "More importantly, Evelyn, what do you think of expanding the educational outreach program to include the underserved schools in Riverside? I've been reviewing the proposal, and I think we could allocate additional funding." She allowed the subject change with a small smile that conveyed both understanding and approval. "I've always said you were the one with the true vision for community engagement. Now perhaps we can finally move forward with some of your more ambitious ideas." After the meeting, I found 3 invitations waiting in my email inbox: a charity luncheon, a gallery opening, and most surprisingly, an intimate dinner at the home of Judge Sylvia Pearson, a formidable presence in the city's legal community, who had never previously included me in her social circle. The message was clear. Margaret Harrington was no longer merely Richard's wife, a status derived from his position and influence. I was being recognized as an individual with my own standing, financial, social, and otherwise. As I drove home, my phone rang through the car's system. Caroline Morris, my attorney. "Margaret," she began without preamble. "I've just had the most interesting conversation with Richard's lawyer. Apparently, they're suddenly eager to discuss an amicable resolution to your divorce proceedings. They've proposed a meeting tomorrow at their offices." "Did they say what prompted this change of heart?" I asked, though I could guess. "Not explicitly," Caroline replied, amusement evident in her tone. "But I received a courtesy call from Howard Phillips this morning, informing me of certain changes to Beatrice Harrington's estate planning that might be relevant to our negotiations." "I see," I said. "And what do you recommend?" "That we meet, listen to their proposal, and say very little. Information is leverage, Margaret, and right now they're operating with incomplete information about exactly what Beatrice has done. Let's keep it that way as long as possible." "Agreed," I said. "Though I expect Richard will be contacting me directly before then." Caroline's voice sharpened. "Don't engage without me present. He's likely to fluctuate between charm and intimidation, depending on what he thinks will be effective. Both approaches are manipulative and designed to circumvent the legal process." "I understand," I assured her. 50 years of marriage has made me quite familiar with Richard's tactical approaches to getting what he wants." "Good," she said. "Oh, and Margaret?" Wear something striking tomorrow. Confidence sends its own message. Richard's call came, as I had predicted, later that afternoon. I was in the garden, pruning roses with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years, when his name appeared on my phone screen. Taking a deep breath, I answered with a composed, "Hello, Richard?" Maggie. His voice held a forced casualness that immediately put me on alert. I've been thinking about our situation. This adversarial approach isn't good for either of us. We should talk, just the two of us, before the lawyers complicate everything with their billable hours and legal maneuvering. Caroline has advised me not to discuss our divorce without her present, I replied, continuing to deadhead spent roses as I spoke. I found her advice valuable. Since when do you need someone else to tell you how to have a conversation with your husband of 50 years? He asked, a hint of his familiar condescension creeping into his tone. This isn't like you, Maggie. You've always been reasonable, pragmatic. Perhaps you don't know me as well as you thought, I suggested mildly. People can surprise you, can't they? Look at you, discovering a whole new side of yourself at 65. A side that prioritizes passion over commitment, nostalgia over history. There was a pause, then a change in tactic. I understand you're hurt and angry, he said, his voice softening to the conciliatory tone he'd always used when he wanted to move past a disagreement without actually addressing its cause. That's natural, but we've built a life together, raised children, created a legacy. Surely we can find a way forward that honors that shared history. I believe that's what tomorrow's meeting is for, I replied. To discuss a way forward. I'm looking forward to hearing the proposal your attorney has prepared. Damn it, Maggie, he snapped, the veneer of reasonableness cracking. What have you said to Aunt B? My credit cards aren't working. The country club is suddenly reviewing my membership, and I can't even access my own investment accounts without additional verification. What the hell is going on? The genuine confusion in... His voice suggested he hadn't yet learned the full extent of Beatrice's actions. I suggest you speak with your aunt directly, I advised, taking satisfaction in the precision of my cuts to the rosebush, revealing the clean, strong structure beneath the overgrowth. I'm sure she can clarify any questions you have about your financial arrangements. She's not taking my calls, he admitted, frustration evident in his voice. Her housekeeper says she's indisposed whenever I phone, and the doorman won't let me up to the penthouse. It's ridiculous. I'm her closest relative, her only heir. I paused, considering how much to reveal. Richard, I said finally, I think it would be best if we continue this conversation with our attorneys present tomorrow. There have been developments that will impact our negotiations. What kind of developments? He demanded. Maggie, if you know something, you need to tell. Me? This is my financial future we're talking about. Our financial futures, I corrected gently, which we'll discuss tomorrow with proper representation. I need to go now, Richard. The garden won't tend itself. The garden? He repeated incredulously. You're hanging up on me to prune roses? Yes, I confirmed, feeling a small thrill at prioritizing my own pleasure over his demands. Goodbye, Richard. I disconnected the call and returned my attention to the Royal Jubilee climbing rose that had been a particular favorite of mine for years. Its spectacular blooms required regular attention and care, but the results were well worth the effort, a lesson that seemed particularly relevant to my current situation. Later that evening, as I sat in what had been Richard's study reviewing documents Caroline had sent in preparation for tomorrow's meeting, the doorbell rang. Glancing at the security monitor installed years ago at Richard's insistence, I was surprised to see a striking blonde woman in her early 60s standing on my porch. Even after 50 years, I recognized her immediately. Elaine Winters, Richard's high school girlfriend and current... What? Partner? Lover? Affair? There was no established etiquette for what to call the woman your husband left you for after half a century of marriage. For a moment, I considered not answering. There was no protocol demanding that I engage with the woman who had participated in the dismantling of my marriage, no matter how inadvertently. But curiosity, and perhaps a certain confidence in my newly established position, led me to the door. "Hello, Elaine," I said calmly as I opened it, taking in her appearance with an objective eye. She was attractive in a carefully maintained way: tasteful makeup, expensive highlights in her blonde hair, a slender figure showcased by designer clothing that whispered rather than shouted its quality. "This is unexpected." She seemed momentarily taken aback by my composed greeting. "Margaret," she began, then faltered. I hope I'm not intruding." "That would depend on why you're here," I replied, neither inviting her in nor explicitly turning her away. She squared her shoulders, visibly gathering her courage. "I thought we should talk, woman to woman, about Richard, about what's happened. May I come in, just for a few minutes?" Against my better judgment, or perhaps because of a desire to fully understand the situation I now found myself in, I stepped back and gestured her inside. "The living room is through there," I directed. "Would you like tea?" "No, thank you," she said, following me into the formal living room that had hosted countless dinner parties and social gatherings throughout my marriage. She perched tentatively on the edge of an armchair, looking around at the tasteful furnishings and family photographs, with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. I took a seat opposite her, waiting silently. Whatever had brought Richard's new partner to my door, it wasn't my responsibility to ease her discomfort or facilitate her mission. "Your home is beautiful," she offered finally. "Richard described it, but seeing it in person, it's even lovelier than I imagined." "Thank you," I said simply. "It's been my home for 30 years. I've put considerable care into it." She nodded, then seemed to steel herself for what she had come to say. "Margaret, I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you. When I reconnected with Richard at the reunion, I had no expectation that it would lead to this. We were just reminiscing, sharing memories of a simpler time. And yet here we are," I observed. "You living with my husband of 50 years, wearing what appears to be a rather significant diamond pendant." I nodded toward the necklace visible beneath her blouse, the same one I had discovered in Richard's safe. Her hand flew to her throat, a flush rising in her cheeks. "You know about the necklace?" "I found the box and card in Richard's safe," I confirmed. "For Elaine, the love I never forgot." Quite romantic, considering he purchased it while still sharing a bed with his wife of 5 decades. She had the grace to look genuinely uncomfortable. "I didn't know he had bought it before telling you. He gave it to me the night he moved into my condo." "I see," I said, though in truth the timing of the gift hardly mattered. What mattered was the intent behind it, the planning, the secrecy, the certainty of Richard's decision to leave before he had ever given me the opportunity to address whatever dissatisfaction had led to his choice. "Richard is very upset," Elaine continued, shifting topics abruptly. "About his aunt, about the financial situation. He says you've somehow influenced Beatrice against him, that you're trying to take everything, even his inheritance. So that was why she had come, not to apologize or seek understanding, but to advocate for Richard's financial interests." "Is that what he told you?" I asked, genuinely curious about how he had framed the situation to her. She nodded. "He says it's vindictive, that you're punishing him for following his heart by trying to ruin him financially. That's not fair, Margaret. Whatever happened between you and Richard, the inheritance from his aunt has always been his birthright." I considered how to respond, weighing the satisfaction of revealing the full truth against the strategic advantage of allowing Richard to continue operating with incomplete information. "Elaine," I said finally, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I haven't influenced Beatrice in any way. I simply informed her of Richard's decision to end our marriage. But the accounts, the credit cards, are matters between Richard And his aunt, I interrupted gently. And between Richard and me, to be resolved through proper legal channels. Which is why I'm meeting with his attorney tomorrow. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. He loves you, you know. He always has in his way. But sometimes a person needs to seize a second chance at real happiness, at the kind of passionate connection that might have been lost through the accidents of timing and circumstance. I felt a sudden, unexpected pang of sympathy for this woman, who apparently believed she was participating in some grand romantic narrative, rather than the cliched crisis of an aging man afraid of his own mortality. "How long was your first marriage, Elaine?" I asked. 38 years, she replied, until Harold's Alzheimer's took him away piece by piece. I was his caregiver for the last 8 of those years. That must have been incredibly difficult, I acknowledged sincerely. I'm sorry for your loss and for the long goodbye that preceded it. She seemed surprised by my empathy. Thank you. It was challenging. Sometimes I felt like I'd already been widowed years before he actually died. That's why reconnecting with Richard felt so vital, like the universe was offering a second chance at life. I nodded, understanding the appeal of that narrative, particularly after the extended grief of caring for a declining spouse. I can see why that would be compelling, I said. For both of you. Then you understand, she said, relief evident in her voice. You'll stop whatever you're doing to interfere with Richard's inheritance? And there it was, the real purpose of her visit, the concern that had driven her to approach the wife her lover had abandoned. Not guilt or compassion or woman to woman, honesty but financial self-interest. Elaine, I said carefully, I'm not interfering with anything. Beatrice is a strong-willed, independent woman who makes her own decisions. If she's chosen to reconsider her estate planning, that's entirely her prerogative. But as for Richard's current financial constraints, I continued, those are temporary measures related to our divorce proceedings. Standard practice to preserve marital assets until a settlement is reached. She looked unconvinced but seemed to realize she would get no further concessions. I should go, she said, rising from her chair. Richard doesn't know I came. He'd be upset if he found out. I won't mention it, I assured her, walking her to the door. As she stepped onto the porch, I added, Elaine, I hope you find the happiness you're looking for with Richard. But a word of advice, from someone who has known him for 50 years. He values what he thinks he might lose far more than what he securely possesses. Something to consider as you move forward together. Her expression flickered. Confusion, then a flash of uncertainty, quickly masked. I'm not worried, she said with forced confidence. What Richard and I have is different. I'm sure it is, I agreed, and meant it. What they had was new, untested by decades of compromise and commitment. It existed in a fantasy space outside the constraints of ordinary life, a romance fueled by nostalgia and midlife restlessness rather than the deep knowledge of each other's. True character that only comes with time. After she left, I returned to the study, my mind replaying our strange encounter. There had been moments when I'd glimpsed a genuinely vulnerable woman seeking connection after years of loss and caregiving. But those glimpses had been overshadowed by her focus on Richard's financial concerns he had clearly shared with her in detail. I picked up my phone and texted Caroline. Just had unexpected visit from Richard's partner, Elaine. Concerned. Primarily about his financial situation and inheritance. Kept details vague as discussed. See you tomorrow at 10. Her response came quickly. Well done. Wear the navy St. John suit with the statement necklace. Power without flash. I smiled at her attention to detail, appreciating the strategic thinking behind her fashion advice. Tomorrow's meeting would be theater as much as negotiation. A carefully choreographed performance where appearance, demeanor, and controlled information would be as important as the legal facts. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself strangely energized rather than anxious about the confrontation to come. 6 days ago, Richard had upended my world with his announcement on our anniversary. Tonight, I was preparing to negotiate the terms of our divorce from a position of unexpected strength. Not just financial security, but a growing sense of my own capabilities independent of the role I had played for 50 years. The inheritance from Beatrice had certainly altered the practical dynamics of my situation. But the true shift, I was beginning to realize, was internal. A fundamental reframing of how I saw myself and my place in the world. For decades, I had been Richard Harrington's wife, a position that came with both privileges and constraints. Now, through a twist of fate I never could have anticipated, I was emerging as Margaret in my own right, heir to a fortune, owner of a magnificent home, and a woman who was just beginning to imagine the possibilities that lay ahead when no longer defined by her relationship to others. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and revelations. But tonight, as I lay in the center of what had been our bed, I realized I was no longer dreading the confrontation with Richard. Instead, I was curious, even eager, to discover who I would be in this new dynamic, how I would conduct myself, when meeting him not as the supportive wife of 50 years, but as the independent woman I was becoming. 6 days after being abandoned on my golden anniversary, I fell asleep with a sense of anticipation rather than grief. The life I had planned had ended, yes, but the life that was unfolding in its place held possibilities I was only beginning to imagine. The offices of Whitman, Stevens, and Powell occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, their wealth and influence announced by the understated elegance of their reception area. I had been here many times before, but always as Mrs. Richard Harrington. Today was different. Caroline Morris and I arrived precisely 5 minutes before the scheduled meeting time. I wore the navy St. John suit that conveyed affluence without ostentation, accented by a striking silver pendant that had been a gift to myself on my 60th birthday, one of the few significant jewelry purchases I had made without consulting Richard. "Remember," Caroline murmured as we were escorted toward the conference room, "minimal reaction, no matter what is said." The conference room door opened to reveal a tableau that momentarily disrupted my carefully maintained composure. Richard sat at the far side of the polished table, flanked by his attorney Walter Preston, and, surprisingly, Elaine. Her presence at what should have been a private legal discussion was clearly meant as a statement. If Richard had hoped for visible distress, he was disappointed. I acknowledged the group with a poised nod, taking the seat Caroline indicated without allowing my gaze to linger on either Richard or Elaine. "Mrs. Harrington, Ms. Morris," Walter began, his tone professionally cordial. "Thank you for joining us today." "Of course," Caroline replied smoothly, though I must admit some surprise at Ms. Winter's presence. I was under the impression this was to be a discussion between the parties and their legal representation. Richard shifted impatiently. "Elaine is part of my life now, Caroline. What affects my financial future affects hers as well." "I see," Caroline replied. "Shall we proceed? I believe you had a proposal to present." Walter cleared his throat and slid a document folder across the table. "Yes. We've prepared what we believe is a fair and equitable division of assets, taking into account the length of the marriage and Mrs. Harrington's contributions as a homemaker and supportive spouse." Caroline opened the folder and scanned its contents. "Interesting approach? You're proposing a 70-30 division of marital assets in Mr. Harrington's favor, with Mrs. Harrington retaining the house but paying Mr. Harrington for his equity share, over a 10-year period at prime plus 2% interest." I maintained my neutral expression, though inwardly I was astonished by the audacity of their opening position. "Richard has been the primary breadwinner throughout the marriage," Walter pointed out. "His earnings and investment acumen are responsible for the majority of the wealth they've accumulated." Caroline raised an eyebrow. It's an interesting interpretation of realities, particularly given recent developments. What developments? Walter asked, his gaze sharpening. Caroline glanced at me, a small nod indicating I should respond. Beatrice Harrington has revised her estate planning, I said calmly. Richard is no longer her primary heir. The statement landed in the room. Like a stone dropped into still water, ripples of reaction visible in each face across the table. Walter's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing genuine surprise. Elaine's fingers tightened on the arm of her chair. But it was Richard's response that was most pronounced, a flush rising from his collar, the muscle in his jaw tightening. That's impossible, he said flatly. I'm her only nephew, her closest living relative. Intentions can change, I replied, simply. Particularly when circumstances evolve in unexpected ways. Caroline extracted a slim document from her portfolio and slid it across the table. This is a letter from Howard Phillips, Beatrice Harrington's attorney, confirming changes to her estate plan. As you'll see, Richard will receive a modest bequest of $100,000. The remainder of her estate, currently valued at approximately $43 million, will pass to other beneficiaries. This is outrageous, Richard erupted, his composed facade crumbling entirely. You did this, Margaret. You've poisoned Aunt Bee against me. Richard, Walter cautioned, placing a restraining hand on his client's arm. Who? Richard demanded. Who is she leaving everything to, if not me? I met his gaze directly for the first time. That's not relevant to our divorce proceedings, Richard. What matters is that your financial landscape has changed significantly since you left our marriage. It's you, isn't it? His voice was dangerously quiet now. She's leaving everything to you. Neither Caroline nor I confirmed or denied his conclusion, but our silence was answer enough. Elaine made a small sound, distress or disbelief, and reached for Richard's hand. He pulled away abruptly, his focus entirely on me. Why? He asked. Genuine confusion beneath the anger. Why would she do this? Perhaps because I've been the one visiting her weekly for the past decade, I suggested gently. While you were too busy with your investment club or golf commitments to accompany me. Walter attempted to redirect. Regardless of Ms. Harrington's estate plans, we need to focus on the division of marital assets that currently exist. I agree, Caroline said. And given the new information available, I suggest you revise your proposal to reflect the actual financial positions of both parties. Moving forward, what exactly are you proposing? Walter asked cautiously. Caroline closed the folder containing their original offer and pushed it back across the table. An equitable division of existing marital assets, 50-50, as is standard in long-term marriages. Mrs. Harrington will retain the Victorian home outright, with no buyout payment to Mr. Harrington. Mr. Harrington will retain his personal investment accounts and retirement funds, while Mrs. Harrington will retain the inheritance portfolio from her parents. That's completely unacceptable, Richard declared, though his tone lacked conviction. I've spent 30 years restoring and maintaining that house. It's been in my family for generations. It's been in our family, I corrected quietly. And it's where I've lived for 3 decades, where I've created a home, tended the gardens, preserved the history. It's where I intend to remain. Walter leaned close to Richard, murmuring something I couldn't hear. After a moment, he straightened. We'll need to review this proposal and the information regarding Ms. Harrington's estate planning. Of course, Caroline agreed smoothly. Though I should mention that Beatrice has already transferred certain assets to my client, a stock portfolio, the vacation property in the Adirondacks, and her American Impressionist collection. Those transfers are complete and irrevocable. Richard's head snapped up at the mention of the art collection. The Impressionists, all of them? The Hassam? The Metcalf? The entire collection, I confirmed. Elaine finally spoke. This seems vindictive. punishing Richard for following his heart by taking away his financial security and family legacy. I turned to her with genuine curiosity. Is that how you see it? I see it as consequences naturally flowing from choices freely made. Each person, exercising their autonomy, making decisions they believed would best serve their happiness. Isn't that what you and Richard have advocated? She had no response to this framing. I think we're finished for today, Caroline concluded. We'll expect your revised proposal by next Wednesday. As we rose to leave, Richard addressed me directly. Maggie, can we speak privately for a moment? I hesitated, then nodded to Caroline. 5 minutes. Once we were seated in a quiet corner of the reception area, Richard leaned forward. I never meant to hurt you, he said softly. You have to believe that. I understand that, I said, and was surprised to find it was true. But intentions don't negate impact, Richard. Did you have to go to Aunt B? He asked, a plaintive note in his voice. I didn't go to her, I clarified. I answered her call and responded honestly to her questions. The rest was entirely her decision. He sighed heavily, suddenly looking every day of his 65 years. I've made a mess of things, haven't I? 50 years of marriage, my relationship. With Aunt B, the financial security I've worked toward my entire career, all of it compromised in a matter of days. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. This man I had loved for so long, now facing the concrete repercussions of his choices. You still have your health, your children, though they're currently quite angry with you, and apparently a relationship that brings you genuine happiness, I pointed out. Those aren't small things, Richard. No, he agreed, looking toward Elaine. They're not. But the cost has been higher than I anticipated. It often is, I said, rising to signal the end of our conversation. We rarely calculate the true price of our choices until the bill comes due. 3 months later. The summer evening cast long golden shadows across my garden as I added final touches to the hors d'oeuvres arranged on silver platters. Through the open French doors, I could hear Diana directing the caterers in the dining room, now transformed into the elegant gallery space I had always envisioned, but never had the courage to create while married to Richard. Mom, these look amazing, Elizabeth said, appearing at my side to survey the artistic arrangements of food. But you shouldn't be working. This is your night. I smiled at my daughter, who had flown in from Chicago specifically for this evening. It calms my nerves, I admitted. First art showing jitters, I suppose. Well, they're unfounded, James said confidently, joining us with a glass of champagne in each hand. He passed one to me. I've already had 3 people ask if the landscape series is for sale. And Daniel says there's a gallery owner from New York who's particularly interested in your work. The past 3 months had brought changes I never could have anticipated when Richard walked out on our anniversary. The divorce had been finalized with surprising efficiency once Richard had accepted the new reality of our respective financial positions. I had retained the Victorian mansion and established a substantial foundation for arts education in underserved communities, with part of Beatrice's initial gift. Most significantly, I had transformed the formal dining room into the art studio I had always wanted and dedicated myself to painting with a passion and focus that had been simmering beneath the surface for decades. Tonight marked my first showing, an intimate gathering of friends, family, and select members of the art community to view the collection I had created during this period of profound personal transformation. Margaret, darling, Diana called from the doorway, your guests are arriving, and Beatrice's car just pulled up. I took a deep breath, straightened my silk blouse, emerald green, a color Richard had always thought too bold for me, and moved to greet my guests. The evening unfolded like a dream, champagne flowing, conversation humming, my children proudly showing visitors through the exhibition of my work. Critics and collectors moved thoughtfully from piece to piece, occasionally making notes or engaging me in discussions about technique and inspiration. Beatrice, now 94 but still formidable, held court in a comfortable chair positioned to oversee the proceedings. She had become an unexpected mentor in these past months, her clear-eyed pragmatism and unapologetic approach to life providing a model for my own reinvention. "Quite a transformation," she observed as I joined her briefly. "Both the house and the woman who owns it." "Thank you," I said, genuinely appreciative of her approval. "For everything," she waved away my gratitude with a dismissive gesture. "I merely recognized quality when I saw it. You've done the actual work of becoming." As the evening progressed, I found myself moving through my transformed home with a confidence and ease I had never experienced in the decades I had lived here with Richard. This was now truly my space, reflecting my aesthetic, my passions, my vision, not a shrine to Harrington family traditions or a backdrop for Richard's professional advancement. Near midnight, as the last guests were departing, I escorted Beatrice to her car, her hand resting lightly on my arm for support. "I saw the announcement in the paper," she said abruptly, "about Richard and that woman, their engagement." I nodded, having seen the same small notice in the society pages. "Yes, the divorce has been final for 6 weeks. They're free to move forward." "Does it hurt?" she asked, her directness unfettered by age or convention. I considered the question seriously, searching for the honest answer. "No," I said finally. "It feels appropriate. They've chosen their path, as I've chosen mine." "And you prefer yours," she stated rather than asked. I smiled, looking back at the house glowing with warmth and light, at my children laughing together on the terrace, at the gallery space displaying the artistic vision I had suppressed for decades. "I do," I confirmed. "Very much." After helping Beatrice into her car and watching it disappear down the driveway, I returned to the terrace where my children and closest friends had gathered for a more intimate celebration. "To Mom," Daniel proposed, raising his glass as I rejoined them. "Artist, philanthropist, and the strongest woman I know." "To Margaret," Diana amended with a knowing smile, who discovered that sometimes the ending of one story is simply the opening chapter of a better one. As glasses clinked and laughter rose into the summer night, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. 3 months ago, I had been devastated by betrayal and loss, my identity shattered along with my marriage. Tonight, I stood in the center of a life richer and more authentic than any I had imagined possible. Richard's departure, which had seemed like the ultimate abandonment, had actually been the catalyst for my liberation. His choice to leave with Elaine had forced me to discover who I was beyond my role as his wife, and that discovery had led to a flowering of creativity, purpose, and joy I had never thought possible at 65. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Elizabeth asked, noticing my momentary introspection. "You have the most peculiar smile." "I was just thinking about unexpected gifts," I replied. "About how sometimes what looks like a devastating loss can actually be the doorway to something precious. Like when a man leaves his wife of 50 years for his high school sweetheart," James asked with a raised eyebrow. "Exactly like that," I confirmed with a laugh. "Because it turns out that after 50 years of being Mrs. Richard Harrington, I rather prefer being simply Margaret." And as the night deepened around us and stars appeared above the garden I had tended for 30 years, I realized that this feeling of wholeness, of purpose, of authentic joy, was what I had been searching for throughout my long marriage without even knowing it was missing. Richard had left on our golden anniversary, believing he was moving toward his own happiness with Elaine. Instead, he had inadvertently set me free to discover mine, a liberation made sweeter by the knowledge that it had come at the very moment he thought he was taking everything from me. His dream inheritance had indeed disappeared overnight. But in its place, I had gained something far more valuable, the chance to discover, claim, and celebrate a life that was truly and completely my own. At 65, I wasn't ending a chapter. I was finally beginning the story I had been meant to write all along. 1 year later. The invitation arrived on heavy cream cardstock, elegant black script announcing the Golden Horizons Gala to benefit the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Women in the Arts. I smiled at the irony as I placed it on the marble countertop of my newly renovated kitchen. An anniversary gala, exactly 1 year since the day Richard had walked out on our own golden anniversary. "Are you actually going to attend?" Diana asked, peering at the invitation over her coffee cup. Our Saturday morning brunches had become a cherished ritual over the past year. The invitation clearly states, "and guest," and Mr. and Mrs. Richard Harrington are on the attendance list. "Of course," I replied, adding fresh berries to our plates. "I'm the foundation's chairwoman, after all. It would be rather odd if I didn't appear at my own gala." Diana hummed noncommittally. Adults who happen to be in dramatically reversed circumstances compared to where they were a year ago. That's bound to create some tension. She wasn't wrong. The past year had brought changes neither Richard nor I could have anticipated. The divorce had been finalized quickly once Richard realized the futility of contesting it. With Beatrice's inheritance secured, I had established the foundation that bore my full name, Eleanor Margaret Whitmore, reclaiming my family name alongside my given one. Meanwhile, Richard's financial situation had become increasingly precarious. His company had accelerated his retirement, his investments had suffered in the recent market downturn, and Elaine had apparently not anticipated the lifestyle. Adjustments that would accompany marriage to a man whose financial prospects had diminished so dramatically. "I've invited someone, actually," I said casually, watching Diana's expression shift from surprise to delight. "The mysterious professor from the gallery opening?" "Richard Thornton," I confirmed with a small smile at the irony of the shared name. "And yes, we've been seeing each other regularly for the past 4 months." "Regularly," Diana repeated with a raised eyebrow. Such a careful choice of words. "We enjoy each other's company. He's intelligent, thoughtful, passionate about art and literature. We attend lectures and exhibits, have dinner, talk for hours. It's comfortable but stimulating. Exactly what I want at this stage of my life." "And?" Diana prompted, clearly, expecting more. "And nothing," I replied firmly. "I'm not looking for another husband, Diana. I'm enjoying my independence far too much for that. Richard respects that boundary. It's one of the things I appreciate most about him." As we moved to the terrace to enjoy the spring sunshine, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The Victorian mansion had been transformed room by room, not erasing its history or character, but adapting it to reflect my aesthetic and needs rather than preserving it as a museum to Harrington family traditions. The formal dining room was now my art studio flooded with northern light from newly installed skylights. The stuffy sitting room had become a casual gathering space filled with comfortable furniture and vibrant colors. Richard's dark, masculine study was now a bright library and reading room where my book club met monthly. Most significantly, I had finally moved out of the master bedroom where Richard and I had slept for 3 decades. Instead, I had renovated the East Wing suite, creating a bright, peaceful sanctuary overlooking the rose garden. The evening of the gala arrived with perfect early summer weather. I dressed in a gown I had designed myself, midnight blue silk, that complemented my silver hair, with clean, elegant lines that felt both classic and contemporary. "Mom, you look stunning," Elizabeth said as she helped me fasten a simple diamond pendant at my throat, a gift from Beatrice on the day the foundation had been established. Absolutely radiant. "Thank you, darling," I replied, studying our reflection in the mirror, mother and daughter, both strong, accomplished women with lives of purpose and meaning. "I feel right." in my skin, in my life, in this moment. That's what Dad could never understand, she observed quietly. That real beauty comes from that kind of alignment, not from desperately chasing what you think you missed or lost. The garden glowed with thousands of tiny lights strung through the trees and along the stone pathways. Tables draped in cream linen dotted the lawn, each centered with arrangements of golden roses from my garden. A small orchestra played classical, pieces near the terrace, while white-jacketed servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Richard Thornton arrived precisely on time, his tall figure distinguished in a classic tuxedo that complemented his silver hair and beard. At 68, the retired art history professor had an easy confidence and gentle humor that had drawn me to him immediately upon our introduction at a gallery opening 6 months earlier. Eleanor, he greeted me, using my formal name as he always did in public settings. His eyes warmed as they took in my appearance. You look absolutely magnificent, the quintessential foundation chairwoman. The evening progressed with smooth elegance. Donors circulated through the garden. Art enthusiasts admired the exhibition of emerging female artists displayed in the renovated conservatory, and a steady stream of well-wishers congratulated me on the foundation's remarkable first year of operations. I was deep in conversation with the dean of the local university's art department when I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a momentary hush. In conversation, a redirection of attention toward the garden entrance. Looking up, I saw Richard and Elaine making their way into the reception area, both impeccably dressed but somehow diminished from the confident couple I remembered. "Shall we go say hello?" Richard Thornton asked quietly at my elbow, having materialized beside me with the perfect timing that was becoming one of his most appreciated traits. Yes, I decided after a moment's consideration. Best to address the elephant in the garden directly. With his hand resting lightly at the small of my back, we made our way across the lawn to where Richard and Elaine stood somewhat awkwardly, champagne flutes clutched perhaps a bit too tightly. "Richard, Elaine," I greeted them with genuine civility. "Thank you for coming. Your support for the foundation is appreciated." "Maggie," Richard responded, then caught himself. "Eleanor, you look wonderful." "Thank you," I replied, then turned slightly. "May I introduce Richard Thornton?" "Richard, this is Richard Harrington and his wife Elaine." The two Richards shook hands with the slightly strained courtesy of men who knew exactly who the other was, in relation to me. Elaine's smile was fixed, her gaze darting between me and my companion with poorly disguised assessment. "The foundation has done remarkable work in its first year," Richard offered, clearly reaching for neutral territory. "The scholarship program for female artists is particularly impressive." "It's a cause close to my heart," I acknowledged. "Providing opportunities that might otherwise be missed or delayed by circumstance." A flash of something, recognition perhaps, or regret, crossed his face at my words. He looked older than when I had last seen him, the lines around his eyes deeper, a certain heaviness in his posture that hadn't been there before. Later, as the evening wound toward its conclusion and guests began to depart, I found myself alone, with Richard for a brief moment near the rose garden that had always been my particular domain. "You've changed the garden," he observed, looking at the more natural, less formal design I had implemented over the past year. "It's beautiful. More alive somehow." "Thank you," I said. I decided it was time to let it breathe a bit, to find its own form rather than being constantly shaped and contained. He smiled slightly, catching the metaphor. "Appropriate," he acknowledged. "How is Aunt Bee, really? I've tried to visit, but—" "She's remarkably well for 94, I replied honestly. "Though slowing down naturally. She asks about you, occasionally." Hope flickered briefly in his eyes. "Does she? Perhaps I could—" "As a matter of academic interest," I clarified gently, not wanting to offer false hope. Beatrice is consistent in her judgments, Richard. You know that better than most, he nodded, resignation replacing hope. Yes, well, that's Aunt B. He hesitated, then added, You seem happy, Maggie. Truly happy, not just coping. I am, I confirmed, seeing no reason to deny what must be obvious to everyone who knew me. It's been quite a journey this past year, but a worthwhile one. And Thornton? He asked, a hint of the old possessiveness creeping into his tone. Is he good to you? He's a friend, Richard. A companion. Someone who engages my mind and appreciates my perspective. That's what I want in my life now. Authentic connection without obligation or expectation. I see, he said, though his expression suggested he didn't. Not really. How are things with you and Elaine? I asked, more out of courtesy than genuine curiosity. Good, he said automatically, then amended. Challenging, at times. The financial adjustments have been significant, but we're managing. I nodded, unsurprised. Change is rarely easy, Richard, but you made your choice with open eyes, following what you believed would bring you happiness. There's courage in that, whatever the outcome. He looked at me with genuine surprise. That's remarkably generous, considering. Considering you left me on our golden anniversary for your high school girlfriend? I supplied with a small smile. Perhaps, but bitterness is an indulgence I can no longer afford. It occupies space I need for more important things. A quiet dignity seemed to settle over him. You always were the better person, Maggie. I just didn't recognize it until it was too late. Not better, I corrected gently. Just different, with different needs and values that I'm only now giving proper priority. I glanced toward the terrace where Richard Thornton waited patiently. I should get back to my guests. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and my family had retired to their rooms, I found myself once again in the garden. The lights still twinkled in the trees, creating a magical ambiance in the midnight quiet. I sat on the stone bench beneath the wisteria arch, breathing in the fragrance of roses and remembering another night in this same spot a year earlier, when my world had been shattered and my future suddenly unwritten. Mom? Elizabeth's voice came softly from the terrace. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, I assured her, patting the bench beside me. Just taking a moment to appreciate how far we've come. She joined me, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders against the mild night air. It was quite an evening. Your foundation is making a real difference, you know. Those scholarship recipients were so passionate about their work, so grateful for the opportunity. That's what gives it meaning, I agreed. Creating possibilities for women who might otherwise never have the chance to discover their full potential. Like you, she observed. Yes, I acknowledged, though I was fortunate to find my path eventually, even if it took a rather dramatic catalyst to set me on it. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, mother and daughter sharing the peaceful night. I saw you talking with Dad, Elizabeth said finally. That looked intense. Not intense, I corrected. Just honest. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, we were speaking to each other as we truly are, not as the roles we occupied for 50 years. And how was that? I considered the question carefully. Liberating, I decided. For both of us, I think. There's a certain freedom in acknowledging the truth of what was, what is, and what can never be again. Elizabeth leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture reminiscent of her childhood. I'm so proud of you, Mom. You've shown me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. As she spoke the words, I felt their truth resonate through me like the clear tone of a bell. It was never too late. Not at 65, not after 50 years of marriage, not after decades of deferred dreams and subjugated desires. The path forward wasn't defined by what had been lost or taken, but by what could still be discovered, created, and embraced. Richard had left me on our golden anniversary believing he was moving toward his true destiny with Elaine. Instead, he had inadvertently set me free to discover mine. A beginning disguised as an ending, a gift wrapped in the garments of betrayal. 1 year later, as I sat in my transformed garden with my daughter beside me and my family sleeping peacefully, in the home that was truly mine at last, I realized that life's most profound turns often come when we least expect them, from directions we never anticipated. Richard's dream inheritance had indeed disappeared overnight. But in that same magical alchemy of circumstance and choice, I had gained something far more precious, the woman I was always meant to be, finally stepping into the light of her own golden horizon. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.